Hi, my name is Kamil, and this year I studied investment banking in ISM this year. To start off my year, I began with a quote, something that I would use to sort of drive me through the entire year. I chose this one by Robert Schuller. The only place where your dream becomes impossible is in your own thinking. I view myself as a very self-motivated person, and at times when I need that motivation, I look upon this quote as it explains to me how anything is possible when one puts their mind to it. And throughout this year, I've used this at times when I've sort of struggled, at times where I wasn't sort of getting to where I wanted to be. And this quote ultimately helped me just get to this point today where I'm going to be presenting to you my final product. So a little bit about myself. I was born May 29, 1997 in Paterson, New Jersey. Living in New Jersey, I really didn't get to know the place that well. I lived there for a couple of years before my family moved abroad to Saudi Arabia. Living in Saudi Arabia was probably one of the greatest experiences I've had in my life. I spent about 10 years there moving from city to city, spending the majority of my time in Riyadh. And I attended the American International School over there, where I was able to meet students and teachers from all across the world. I had friends from Germany, from Africa, from different parts of Asia, from the US. It was truly a cultural experience people would love to have. Also, while I spent my time there, I began to sort of gain some hobbies, which included playing some sports. Tennis and soccer were some of my favorite, and I continued them on when I moved back here to the US about 4 or 5 years ago. And just a little bit about my family. My family is my mom, my dad. I have 2 younger sisters. One is a freshman this year, and one is in 6th grade, and I also have a younger brother in elementary. So my mission statement for ISM this year was to seek out and increase my knowledge in the field of finance. Finance is a very broad topic, and within finance there's different things from financial advisors to investment management to stocks, investment bankers, the whole 9 yards. So this year I intended to focus and hone in more on investment banking than anything else, but I also wanted to sort of experience all the other aspects of finance. Ultimately, I wanted to sort of, through my journey, I wanted to make finance more accessible to the average high school student who sort of didn't truly understand the scope of finance. My interest in business began when I spent time with my uncle growing up. A lot of the time during the summers, I would spend a lot of my time with my uncle, and him being the first businessman, quote unquote, in our family was truly an inspiration to me. His father came here to the U.S. working as a mechanic, and having worked over 10 years, he was eventually able to bring over his family. Having that sort of inspiration from my grandfather all the way to my uncle, from a mechanic ultimately becoming a partner at Ernst & Young, one of the big accounting firms, I looked up to him as someone that I wanted to emulate later on in my life. So after sort of understanding business is what I wanted to do, I looked into the various aspects, and I found investment banking to be the one for me. Investment banking you have the ability to impact the entire economy as a whole. And growing up, when I was a little kid, I really didn't know what I wanted to do, but I always wanted to sort of have an impact on others and impact on the greater society as a whole. So I felt investment banking would be the best way to do it with the skill set I have. So what is investment banking? Investment banking could be generally defined as a specific division of banking related to the creation of capital for other companies. Within investment banking itself, there are numerous operations including raising capital, security underwriting, mergers and acquisitions, sales trading, and back office activities. When people most usually think of investment banking, they usually think of the sales and trading and the security underwriting, which has to do with the stock exchange and how usually the hustle and bustle of Wall Street, the constant trading. But investment banking in itself is mostly more about the mergers and acquisitions and raising of capital. Companies usually come to investment banks and sort of ask for advice or consultation on methods that could either improve their operations or ways they could advance and delve into other fields, like several companies have done in the past couple of years. Looking into investment banking, First most thing I did once I entered ISM was to look at the career outlook. As I hope to enter the investment banking world, I would have to initially start off as an analyst. Usually this requires a minimum of a bachelor's degree from a prestigious university, because that's where most investment bankings do the recruiting. And hopefully I intend to get a degree in finance or accounting, because that's the main focus and the skills you need to know to be an investment banker. Later on, sometimes an MBA is required, but nowadays that MBA is not as crucial as it was back in the day. And just to give an FYI, investment banking careers are hard to come by these days. They have lucrative pay, and there's a level of prestige that comes with investment banking. So usually it's really difficult to acquire a job, with only around 20,000 investment banking jobs available worldwide on a yearly basis. Now to my research. As I said, I began the year learning sort of how to get an investment banking job, and I began looking up some articles. One I found really interesting was on mergersandacquisitions.com, sort of forum style website where investment bankers would sort of give their own 2 cents on sort of how to get into the field. The three main points I took away from that were the internship, networking, and the resume. Entering the sophomore and junior years in college, you have the opportunity to usually intern at an investment bank, and landing one of these internships during your sophomore and junior year is probably one of the most crucial things you can do to ultimately gain a job in the investment banking world. During those internship summers, you usually head up to New York or one of the large cities where they have the main offices, and you work alongside the analyst and associate who are actually working. And unlike other internships where you're sort of minimalized, investment banking internships throw you right into the midst of things, so you clearly get a great learning experience. The networking part of that is just general to all aspects of a professional career. Just as I've learned in ISM, networking is key, whether it's to gain an interview, gain a mentor, or just be able to gain information. So networking I view as one of the key aspects, not only in investment banking, but in the professional world as a whole. And lastly, the resume. A lot of investment banks, due to its diversity, whether it's the investment banks of the energy sector or the consumer sector, and so on, there's different ways people sort of change up the resumes to appeal to the certain bank they're trying to get to. And I found that very interesting because I wasn't aware of that. Second, my research led me to the different type of investment banks. I found there were bulge brackets, which were the larger ones like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, the ones you hear of, and the more of the boutique banks, which are the Lazards and the Howell and Lokis, which on a degree provide the same services, but they just don't deal with the same level of deals as Goldman Sachs would deal with hundreds and billions of dollars worth of deals. Lazard would just deal with like $1 billion or $2 billion. So I found that very interesting because I wasn't aware of the tier and the different types of firms available in investment banking. Lastly, I also focused on mergers and acquisitions, which is a key aspect in what I eventually learned a lot about later on in the year, was that merger and acquisitions are sort of gaining popularity once again following the recent collapse in 2008. And a lot of companies are now wanting to sort of diversify, and maybe an electronic company would want to enter like the pharmaceutical business, so buy a company that's succeeding there, or a company in the oil industry would maybe want to diversify and sort of invest and acquire a company in the natural renewable resources. I also went and looked up some of the valuation methods available that investment banking analysts are required to do during the first year, and I found this presentation or PowerPoint I was going through by one of the NYU professors who's regarded as one of the best. So I was just able to sort of go through his presentations, take some notes, and understanding the valuation process. This was my first exposure to the valuation process. I wasn't aware of it, so I just found this to be very instrumental in my overall ISM journey. And lastly, I also did a research on the sort of the environment in Wall Street. Wall Street comprises of multiple institutions within the financial world, and the two main ones right now currently are the investment banks and also the private equity firms. Private equity firms are sort of the opposite of investment banks, and investment banks aim to help sell companies and help sell products. Private equity firms are the institutional buyers, which usually buy the firms. So they're sort of the buy side, they'll be considered the buy side, and the investment banks are usually the sell side. One key part of this year, one trip I truly cherished was the field trip to UNT. I was able to attend two classes, one with Dr. Nishi and one with Dr. Sager. The first one I wanted to focus more on finance, what I was studying, so I attended Dr. Nishi's class. At his class, he spoke about the different types of stocks, common, preferred, the dividends and how those are calculated. Dividends are usually a little percentage of the stock that companies pay off to buyers in addition to their return, sort of to entice them and reward them for investing in the company. And then lastly, the taxes. Taxes play a huge role when it comes to corporate America, and depending on what tax bracket you are in, it can affect your operations and your future plans. And then my second class with Dr. Sager was more of a management class. It was business as a whole, and his lesson focused on the role of a executive within a business. He focused on the morale and motivation that a successful executive needs to have in order to sort of push forward his employees and get things done. And he used a variety of mediums he said that would be helpful, including books, music, religion, and just a variety of tools that could help improve morale and motivation in a company. Now to my interviews. I began the interview process mid-September, and I ended up interviewing a financial advisor just because I found it to be a very interesting career within the financial field. So I met with Miss Etheridge, and she was probably one of the most unique interviews I had the entire year. She brought a perspective I did not see with anyone, because the thing was, she grew up in a small town in Texas where a lot of the women did not enter the field of finance, especially and once they did not succeed to the level of success she has had. So when she was initially entering the field, she was treated with a lot of skepticism and was treated very poorly, and this motivated her to sort of take control of her own career and become a financial advisor, where she could set her own hours, her own clients, and her own company in a sense. So she could make all the calls, and this has led her to be a very successful person and one of the top advisors in the DFW area. My second interview was Mr. Goodwin from Wells Fargo Securities. He's a managing director, and on the investment banking hierarchy, that's probably that's the top of the top without getting into the board of directors and the CEO. And one of the best things that I liked about him before I went ahead and interviewed with him was he had Wall Street experience. With that being said, he told me a lot about his Wall Street experience, how he used to work 100 hours a week, 120 hours a week with people just yelling and screaming, and the craziness that goes around with Wall Street. He even told me a story how he had a managing director, when he was a vice president at the time, come in and they had a presentation due to a client later on that day, and part of it wasn't complete to the liking of the managing director, so he threw a fit and threw a chair out the skyscraper out in New York City. So just the craziness of Wall Street. Another interview I had was with Robert Kiesnick. He's a professor at UTD in Dallas. He entered the financial world early on in his career, but decided it wasn't for him and focused back into the education part of things. He's done a lot of research and presented a lot of articles and his research in the highly acclaimed Wall Street Journal and the Business Insider magazines. So he's a very well-known individual in the business world. And with him, because he is an academic professor, I wanted to focus more on the technical aspects. So I asked him about cost of equity, cost of debt, and he went on to explain how cost of equity is always higher than the cost of debt. And I used this as sort of a basis to the understanding of the rest of my ISM journey when I wanted to go ahead and conduct my valuations in my original work and final product later on. Mr. Ikob for Crow Holdings, this was a private equity firm because I was just sort of wanted to experience all finance had to offer. He had investment banking experience prior to coming to the private equity firm, but he felt that private equity was more intriguing to him as he had the opportunity to set aside by the companies and then sort of guide it along the path of success, whereas in investment banks, you sort of sell it off and then you can move on to the next company. He wanted to be part of that journey where he could see his idea turning into success. Jared Nix from JP Morgan, he's an investment banking analyst. Coach Goff was kind enough to connect me with him, and he was truly a great interview. He actually was a former student here at Frisco High School and ended up going to the University of Texas and was able to land a job at an investment bank here in Dallas. He went on to tell me about the crazy hours once again, and he went on to sort of explain his perspective as an analyst, as he was the first analyst I had interviewed throughout my interviewing process. He told me about how financial modeling was big, and that's what most of his job entailed, was the modeling aspect of it. So I found that to be just a great experience from someone from the local area, someone from my own high school, getting to that point, so someone I could look up to. And then Mr. Goff, he was another great interview. All these professionals I was able to interview all had their own perspective, and so did he. He was actually worked in the pharmaceutical business for around 35 years, and he was close to being a CEO. He was at the top of his game at the time until he decided he was just tired of it. He didn't feel like it was what he wanted to do. So just one day he decided to call that a quit, go in and become a private wealth manager with no financial experience, with no college degree, with no training whatsoever. And from that point, he has gone to be one of the most successful private wealth managers in the DFW area. He has over $10 billion under his watch as he sort of manages money for families from all across the world, including Mexico, the Middle East, and here in the US. So his ability to sort of just transform himself is something I looked up to, something I wish I can sort of develop later on. The versatility that he displayed was something I want to possess one day. Later on, I interviewed one of his colleagues, Ardif Fuentes, his business partner, who are private wealth managers together. And he, unlike Mr. Goff, had an investment banking background, so he was able to give me insight into that and his transition to private wealth management. The main thing he kept on drilling was get into the best school. He went to Notre Dame, which is one of the best business programs in the entire country. So he said that getting into one of the best schools will truly set you apart in the first place and makes it a lot easier for you to land one of those Wall Street or high-paying jobs. And then lastly, Jake Thompson. He is a colleague of Mr. Goodwin. He's an investment banking analyst, and he's actually based in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I wasn't actually able to interview him face to face, but we had several Skype calls where he was able to sort of guide me through the valuation process and through my final product and my original work. So I found him to be a great tool through this ISM journey. And now to my mentor, Mr. Goodwin. As I said earlier, Mr. Goodwin probably had the most engaging interview out of all the professionals, and I felt that he had the experience I was looking for, and also he was the one that was most willing to help. He is the managing director, as I said earlier. He was born and raised in Canada. He was a former college football player who was drafted in the Canadian Football League, but decided it wasn't for him, and he's married with 2 children. The thing is with Mr. Goodwin, he has a teaching background as he is a professor part-time at UTD, so him being a teacher and having that mindset was ultimately helpful to me as he was able to teach me at times when I struggled, but also provide that support when he was there when I needed him to be. Some of the highlights of my mentor visits with Mr. Goodwin were the National Association of Corporate Directors Conference he invited me to. This was a great experience. I was able to meet CEOs and directors from companies all across the DFW area. I was able to meet the CEO of Sears, the CEO of the PGA store, and just talking to these people and getting their perspective and sort of just ingratiating myself with them helped me sort of see what it takes to get to that position. And at the conference, the main point of emphasis was activism, which is sort of individual investors wanting to sort of take over a company, and the role that a board of directors member would take sort of to safeguard his company from that activist. In the financial world, activists are sort of seen with a negative light. They're usually seen as people who are in it for their own good, and they are very short-sighted in the sense. So that was an interesting topic which I had not discussed within investment banking, because that's more related to the board of directors and not the corporate structure itself. So I found that to be a great experience for myself. And also, as I said, meeting with Mr. Goodwin during our mentor visits, he was able to give me sort of lectures in a way, because he is a professor on the WACC, the weighted average cost of capital, and the DCF, which I ultimately decided to move on and do those as my final product. And then lastly was connecting with Mr. Thompson, who is the analyst. He provided me with a lot of great tools. He provided me with a lot of access to the investment banking databases. As I said earlier, a lot of those are confidential and closed off to just the general public and left solely for like the financial institutions. So connecting with him, Skyping with him, I think we've created a sort of connection and bond that is very unique, because me and him usually text from time to time on a weekly basis, other than just talking and discussing life in general, other than just the investment banking aspect of it. So I found that to be a great connection and great friendship I was able to get thanks to Mr. Goodwin. Now to my original work. For my original work, I intended to complete a leveraged buyout case study from the Northwestern Kellogg School of Business. Mr. Goodwin was able to acquire this due to his connections and sort of pass it down to me. This is one of those case studies that's done usually during a graduate school thing, during graduate school. So giving this to me was quite difficult for me to take on at first, but with time and over the course of the month and weeks, I was able to complete it in a timely manner. So ultimately, the case study represented a 2005 leveraged buyout of Toys R Us by various private equity firms. My role was to be sort of the recommender for my own private equity firm. As I was approached by the other private equity firms, I was given the task of analyzing the investment opportunity and providing my personal recommendation whether to partake in the buyout or to decline it. The steps to this were building the financial model along with projections, to conduct a thorough research into the industry, which included just here in the U.S., Toys R Us here in the U.S., internationally, and then the online based, weigh the risks and merits, and then eventually make a decision. So here, as you can see, is the financial model. I began with some historical financials from 2003 to 2004 just to sort of get a background knowledge of the situation. And as you could see that Toys R Us was sort of struggling, going from 11,305 all the way down to 11,100 later on, 2005. So they were sort of in need. They were losing sales, they were in need, and their margins were slowly decreasing. At that time, it seemed like the private equity firm would have been beneficial. As we see, once the buyout takes place in 2005, the sales increased from 11,000 to around 13,000. So so obviously it was beneficial to a degree. But what's interesting about this, the gross margins, the margins also decreased with that. So while on the surface it may seem that the buyout might have had a positive effect on the company, it really didn't, because it sort of closed down the margins and it decreased the overall net income. As you can see, the net income goes from 213 to 63, ultimately to a loss of 384 million in 2006. So with that being said, into the industry outlook, I began researching and I found that America has seen a decline in traditional toy stores over the years since the early 2000s. That's due to the strong competitions from the likes of Walmart and Target, the large retail chains where they have everything all at one place, so those one-stop shops that's more convenient for others. Online, I found that Toys R Us sort of got to the party late. Amazon has already dominated the space and they continue to do so. So Toys R Us struggled with that, and their outlook online was pretty poor. Surprisingly, globally, Toys R Us was a very successful brand. Outside the US, a lot of toy stores are like mom and pop stores. There's no true franchise like Toys R Us. So Toys R Us, once they enter the global market, were able to dominate the competition and set themselves apart. So globally, they have a very strong market. They have very strong sales and very strong margins. With that being said, that was probably one of the only positive outlooks for the buyout if we went ahead and took place on it. The risks were far outweighed the merits of it, and the emergence of e-commerce, the intense superstore competition, the decline in national retail toy industry, along with the strict regulation on club deals, which are the sort of consortium of private equity firms joining together to buy the Toys R Us. Having that many private equity firms leads to a lot of strict regulations by the SEC. So with that being said, it would be a large challenge for multiple companies to take that on. There you can see it's a graph of net sales ultimately increasing, but the net income sort of being unpredictable at times, increasing to going to a huge loss, to increasing once again, decreasing. So my final verdict for Toys R Us as a potential investor and representing my private equity firm would be to decline the opportunity, because Toys R Us in its current state is unable to handle the changing economic climate and the changing market. Now to my final product. For my final product, I intended to create a Nike profile booklet coupled with two valuation model, a WACC, the weighted average cost of capital, and then the discounted cash flow. For the booklet, I intended to have sort of the background information regarding all the executives, the company structure, the number of stores internationally, globally, the presence online, along with sort of the different products they sell. Because Nike, as we know it today, is more of a sports brand, but it's also, like I said before, like the large companies like to delve into other fields. Nike has some money capital tied into the pharmaceutical and technological fields. So I wanted to look into that. And now I'll go ahead and show you guys I'll go ahead and show my valuations. So here's the WACC, as you can see. Let me zoom in. So the WACC is an average of various companies within the same sector. So I began with Nike, and then its competitors including Under Armour, Adidas, Puma, Crocs, and I found the market value of their equity, which is how much money they possess. And I was able to find this out by multiplying the outstanding shares which were left still on the stock market that weren't being traded currently, multiplied by their current share price. Nike's was around 898.37, which was far greater than all the other companies. The closest one was VF Corp, which is a large company which owns various sporting wear brands. and the debts vary. Nike, for a large company, had a relatively low debt.